I died at 29 in my own home when my stalker finally broke in while my husband was away on another business trip. The police found me 3 days later, after my husband Li Wei returned and discovered the scene. At my funeral, I heard him tell people, "I should have believed her. I thought she was just being paranoid, wanting attention. I was so wrong. Too late. 3 years too late. My name is Chen Yao, and I spent the last 3 years of my life trying to convince my husband that I was being stalked, that someone was following me, leaving notes, breaking into our apartment, watching me through windows. Every time I showed him evidence, he had an explanation. Every time I expressed fear, he accused me of being dramatic. Every time I begged for help, he told me I was creating problems for attention. The stalker killed me while Li Wei was in Shanghai networking. The same excuse he'd used dozens of times to avoid dealing with my concerns. When I opened my eyes again, I wasn't in heaven or a morgue. I was 23, sitting in a university library, and Li Wei was approaching my table with that confident smile I'd once found charming. This was the day we met. The day everything started. "Is this seat taken?" he asked, gesturing to the chair across from me. In my previous timeline, I'd said no. We'd started talking about the book I was reading, and he'd asked for my number before leaving. Within 3 months, we were dating. Within a year, engaged. Within 2 years, married. This time, I didn't even look up from my book. Yes. Someone's sitting there. Oh, I don't see anyone. They're coming back soon. Try another table. I felt his confusion, his surprise at being dismissed. In my previous life, I'd been so flattered by his attention. Li Wei was handsome, successful, from a good family. The kind of man every girl supposedly wanted. Now I knew better. Li Wei's attractiveness meant nothing when he'd rather believe I was lying than deal with the inconvenience of my safety. He walked away. I didn't watch him go. Over the next month, Li Wei tried several more times to approach me. At the library, at the campus coffee shop, even at a mutual friend's party. Each time, I was polite but distant. Friendly but unavailable. "You're really not interested in Li Wei?" My friend Xiaomei asked after the party. "Every girl wants him. He's perfect." "He's not perfect for me." "Why not?" "He's handsome, rich, well-educated, good family." "And those things matter more than compatibility or genuine connection?" Xiaomei looked confused. "Don't you want those things?" "I want someone who trusts me, who believes me when I'm scared, who prioritizes my safety over his convenience." I met her eyes. "Li Wei isn't that person." "How can you possibly know that? You've barely talked to him." "I just know." What I couldn't tell her was that I'd spent 3 years of my previous life begging Li Wei to take my stalking seriously, only to be dismissed, minimized, and gaslit until the stalker finally succeeded in killing me. 6 months after avoiding Li Wei's initial approach, I was working at a design firm and living in a small apartment across the city from the one Li Wei and I had shared in my previous timeline. I'd deliberately chosen a different path, different job, different neighborhood, different social circle. I'd also taken self-defense classes, installed extensive security systems, and maintained careful awareness of my surroundings. Because I knew something crucial. My stalker had been real. And while avoiding Li Wei might change some things, I didn't know if it would prevent the stalking entirely. I was proven right 3 months into my new job. I started noticing a man in a gray jacket watching me from across the street when I left work. The same man appeared at the grocery store I frequented, at the gym where I worked out, at the park where I jogged. This time, I didn't doubt myself. I didn't question whether I was being paranoid. I documented everything. I took photos of the man whenever I could do so safely. I noted dates, times, locations. I varied my routes and schedules to see if the pattern continued. It did. I told my boss, my roommate, my close friends. I went to the police. "This man has been following me for 3 weeks." I told the officer, showing him my documentation. "I don't know who he is or what he wants, but I need this on record." The officer was young, looked skeptical. "Ma'am, are you sure you're not misinterpreting?" "I'm not misinterpreting. I've varied my schedule, changed my routes, taken different transportation. He's still there. That's not coincidence." "Has he approached you? Threatened you? Made any contact?" Not yet. But I don't want to wait until he does. I want this documented now so there's a paper trail. The officer sighed but took my report. We'll keep this on file. If he makes any direct contact or threats, come back immediately. After leaving the police station, I went directly to a security company and had cameras installed in my apartment, a panic button system set up, and reinforced locks placed on all doors and windows. My roommate Ling thought I was overreacting. Chun Yao, don't you think this is excessive? You filed a police report over a guy you've seen a few times. A guy who's been deliberately following me across the city for 3 weeks. But he hasn't done anything. Yet. He hasn't done anything yet. And I plan to make sure it stays that way. This seems like paranoia. It's not paranoia if someone's actually following you. It's caution. 2 weeks later, I came home to find my apartment had been broken into. Nothing was stolen. But items had been moved. My underwear drawer had been gone through. A photo of me was missing from my dresser. I called the police immediately, didn't touch anything, waited outside the apartment for them to arrive. This time, a different officer came, Detective Wang, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and no-nonsense demeanor. You're the one who filed the stalking report 3 weeks ago, she said, reviewing her tablet. Yes. The same man is still following me. And now he's broken into my apartment. The door wasn't forced, she noted, examining the locks. I know. Which means he either picked it or has a key somehow. Which is even more concerning. Detective Wang walked through the apartment, taking photos, making notes. Your security cameras? I only had them installed 2 weeks ago. He must have been watching, waited until I was at work to break in before the cameras could catch him. That suggests planning. Surveillance. This isn't random. She looked at me seriously. Miss Chun, I want you to understand that we're taking this seriously. Your documentation has been excellent, which helps us build a case. But you need to be extremely careful. This person knows where you live, they've been watching you closely enough to know your schedule, and they're escalating. I know. What should I do? First, we're going to have forensics go through this apartment thoroughly. Second, I want you to consider staying somewhere else for a while. Somewhere this person doesn't know about. Third, continue documenting everything. And fourth, she hesitated. Do you have anyone who can stay with you? Family, boyfriend, someone? I have friends. Family in another city. Get someone to stay with you or stay with someone else. Don't be alone right now. I called my brother that night. He lived 2 hours away but agreed to come stay with me for a while. He arrived the next day with his wife, both of them taking my situation completely seriously. You should move back home with mom and dad, my brother said after seeing my documentation and hearing the full story. I have a job here. A life. I'm not letting some creep chase me out of the city. Chun Yao, your safety is more important than your job. I know. But running away isn't always the answer. Sometimes you have to stand and fight. What I didn't tell my brother was that in my previous timeline, the stalker had followed me even when Li Wei and I moved apartments. Distance hadn't stopped him. Running hadn't saved me. This time, I was trying a different approach, facing the threat head-on with proper support and resources. 2 weeks after the break-in, Detective Wang called me. We got DNA from your apartment. It matches a man named Zhao Jun, who has a record for stalking and harassment. We've issued a warrant for his arrest. Do you know why he's targeting me? We're still investigating. But Miss Chun, I need you to know that men like this often don't have a rational reason. Sometimes you cross their path once and they fixated. Sometimes you resemble someone from their past. Sometimes there's no reason at all that makes sense to normal people. Have you found him yet? Not yet. He's not at his registered address and hasn't been for months. We're actively searching. For the next month, I lived in a state of hypervigilance. My brother and sister-in-law stayed with me. I varied my route to work every day. I never went anywhere alone. I checked the security cameras obsessively. And then one night, the camera caught him trying the apartment door. I was awake instantly, panic button pressed. Police called, my brother already on his feet with a baseball bat. We could hear him outside the door, trying to pick the new lock. Police arrived within 4 minutes, fast, but it felt like hours. They caught Zhao Jun still at my door, lockpicks in hand. At the police station, Detective Wang showed me his photo. Is this the man who's been following you? I looked at the face I'd seen across streets, in stores, outside my building. The face from my nightmares in both timelines. Yes. That's him. He's in custody now. With the evidence we have, your documentation, the DNA from the break-in, surveillance footage, the arrest at your door, he's looking at serious charges. Will he go to prison? If the prosecutor does their job and you're willing to testify, yes. Several years at least. I'll testify. During Zhao Jun's trial 6 months later, the full extent of his obsession was revealed. He'd been stalking me since he'd seen me at a coffee shop 9 months earlier. He'd taken hundreds of photos, kept detailed logs of my movements, built elaborate fantasies about us being together. When I took the stand, his lawyer tried to make me seem paranoid, unreliable. Isn't it true, Ms. Chen, that you have a history of anxiety? No. But you installed extensive security systems, filed multiple police reports, essentially became obsessed with the idea of being watched. I became cautious because I was actually being watched. The evidence proves that. Your client's own photos and logs prove that. But before you had evidence, weren't you accusing innocent people of following you? I never accused anyone except the man who was actually following me. I documented, I reported appropriately, I took reasonable safety measures. That's not paranoia, that's rational response to a real threat. The prosecutor backed me up with evidence. The documentation I'd maintained. The police reports that had been filed weeks before the break-in. The DNA evidence. The photos and logs found in Zhao Jun's apartment. The jury convicted him on all counts: stalking, harassment, breaking and entering, attempted assault. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison. After the trial, Detective Wang found me in the courthouse hallway. You did everything right, she said. The documentation, the consistent reporting, the security measures. You're the reason we had enough evidence to convict him. I just didn't want to die. She looked at me curiously. That's a specific fear. Most stalking victims are afraid but don't immediately go to "he's going to kill me." I couldn't tell her that I knew because he had killed me in another timeline. I just knew it could escalate. And I wasn't going to wait around to find out how bad it could get. 2 years after first avoiding Li Wei in the library, I was 25 and finally feeling safe again. Zhao Jun was in prison. My life was my own. I'd been promoted at work, moved to a better apartment, started dating someone who took my concerns seriously without question. His name was David, he was a lawyer, and when I told him about my stalking experience on our third date, his response had been, "That must have been terrifying. I'm glad you're safe now. What security measures do you have in place? Do you need help with anything?" Not. Are you sure you weren't overreacting? Not. That seems extreme. Just immediate belief and offers of practical support. That was when I knew I'd found someone fundamentally different from Li Wei. I was at a professional conference with David when I saw Li Wei across the hotel lobby. He looked older, more worn than I remembered. And he was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I turned away, took David's arm, walked in the opposite direction. "Someone you know?" David asked. Someone I avoided. Over the course of the conference, Li Wei tried multiple times to approach me. Each time I saw him coming and moved away, into a crowd, into a session room, to the bathroom, anywhere that wasn't where he was. On the final day, he cornered me in the hallway when I was momentarily alone. "Chen Yao, please. Just 5 minutes. I need to talk to you." "We have nothing to talk about." "We do. Please. I've been trying to reach you for years. And I've been avoiding you for years. Take the hint." "Why? What did I do?" "We met once in university. I thought we had a connection, and you've been running from me ever since. I don't understand." I looked at him directly for the first time in 2 years. "You want to know why? Fine. Here's why. I knew that if I got involved with you, you wouldn't believe me when I needed you to. You would dismiss my concerns as paranoia. You would prioritize your comfort over my safety. You would gaslight me into doubting my own perception of reality. And when something serious happened, you would be useless." Li Wei stared at me, shocked. How could you possibly know that? We've never even had a real conversation. I just knew. Call it intuition. Call it excellent judgment of character. Whatever it is, it was right. That's not fair. Life isn't fair. I chose to protect myself by staying away from someone who would hurt me. That's fair enough. Hurt you? I would never hurt you. Negligence is a form of harm. Dismissal is a form of harm. Gaslighting is a form of harm. Just because you wouldn't hit me doesn't mean you wouldn't hurt me. David appeared at the end of the hallway. Chen, everything okay? Fine. Just leaving. I walked away from Li Wei for what I intended to be the final time. But Li Wei didn't give up. Over the next month, he somehow got my email, my work number, my home address. He sent flowers, letters, messages asking for just one chance to prove I was wrong about him. I documented all of it. Took it to the police. This is harassment, I told Detective Wang, who I'd stayed in contact with. I've told him clearly that I'm not interested. He's found my personal information and won't stop contacting me. Has he threatened you? No. But neither did Zhao Jun at first. And I'm not waiting around to see if this escalates the same way. Detective Wang filed a report and contacted Li Wei with a warning that further contact would result in a restraining order. Li Wei sent one final message. I just wanted to know you. To prove you wrong about me. To show you I'm not the man you think I am. But I respect your boundaries. I'll stop. I hope someday you realize not every man is a threat. I showed the message to David. That's manipulative, he said immediately. He's trying to make you feel guilty for protecting yourself. I know. Are you okay? I'm fine. Just annoyed that I have to keep defending my choice to avoid someone who makes me uncomfortable. You never have to defend that choice. If someone makes you uncomfortable, you have every right to stay away. You don't owe anyone a chance to prove themselves. That was the difference between David and Li Wei. David understood that my comfort and safety came first. Li Wei thought he was entitled to opportunities to prove himself, regardless of my feelings. 3 years after avoiding Li Wei in the library, I was 26 and engaged to David. My life was stable, successful, peaceful. Zhao Jun was still in prison. Li Wei had finally stopped trying to contact me. I was shopping for wedding invitations when I saw a woman I recognized from my previous timeline. Li Wei's sister, Li Mei. She saw me too, approached before I could leave. Chen Yao? I thought that was you. I'm Li Mei Wei's sister. We met once at university. I remember. I wanted to thank you. For what? For rejecting my brother. For refusing to give him a chance. For staying away even when he pursued you. I stared at her, shocked. I know that sounds strange, Li Mei continued. But you need to understand something about Wei. He's not a bad person, but he's dismissive. He thinks he knows better than everyone else. He doesn't take people seriously when they tell him they're scared or hurt or uncomfortable. He just assumes they're being dramatic. Why are you telling me this? Because you knew. Somehow, you saw that in him from the very beginning. And you protected yourself by staying away. She smiled sadly. I wish his ex-girlfriend had been that smart. His ex-girlfriend? He dated someone for 2 years. She kept telling him she felt unsafe in their apartment, that someone was watching her, that things were being moved. He thought she was being paranoid, creating drama for attention. He told her she needed therapy for her anxiety. My blood ran cold. What happened to her? Someone broke into their apartment. She was alone. He was away on a business trip. She survived but was badly hurt. They caught the guy. Turned out she'd been right all along. Someone really was stalking her. But by then the relationship was destroyed. She couldn't forgive him for not believing her, and he couldn't forgive himself for being so wrong. This was my story from my previous timeline. But this time, it had happened to someone else because I hadn't been there to be the victim. Is she okay now? Physically, yes. Emotionally, she's still recovering. But she's alive, and she left him, and she's rebuilding her life. Li Mei looked at me seriously. I'm telling you this because I want you to know that your instincts about my brother were right. You saved yourself from years of being dismissed and endangered. That took incredible self-awareness and courage. How is Li Wei now? devastated, guilty, finally understanding that his dismissiveness could have gotten someone killed. He's in therapy, working on himself. But the damage is done. And frankly, you were smart to never get involved. After Li Mei left, I sat in my car shaking. In my previous timeline, I'd been the woman who was attacked. This time, someone else had taken my place in that story. Someone else had suffered because Li Wei was exactly who I'd known he would be. I called David. I need to tell you something. The full truth about why I avoid Li Wei. We met at a cafe, and I told him everything. About my previous life, about being stalked and killed while Li Wei dismissed my concerns, about being reborn and choosing to avoid him completely, about recognizing his pattern from the very beginning. I sound insane, I finished. I know that. David was quiet for a long moment. Do you believe you literally died and were reborn? I don't know what I believe. But I had knowledge I shouldn't have had. I knew Li Wei would dismiss my concerns even though we'd never had a real conversation. I knew my stalker was real even before I had evidence. I knew exactly what to document and how to protect myself. That knowledge came from somewhere. Does it matter where it came from? What do you mean? Whether you literally lived another timeline, or you just had incredibly accurate intuition. Does it matter? The result is the same. You protected yourself. You trusted your instincts. You took threats seriously. You survived. You don't think I'm crazy? I think you're one of the most rational people I've ever met. You saw danger, recognized it for what it was, and took appropriate action. That's not crazy. That's brilliant. I married David 6 months later. Li Wei's name came up once during the planning process. My mother suggested inviting him since you went to university together. Absolutely not, I said firmly. But wouldn't it be polite? No. He makes me uncomfortable. He pursued me after I repeatedly said no. He doesn't get an invitation to my wedding. You're being very harsh. I'm being appropriately cautious. There's a difference. The wedding was perfect. Small, intimate, filled with people who actually supported and respected both of us. No Li Wei. No drama. No reminders of the life I'd escaped. 5 years after avoiding Li Wei in the library, I was 28. 1 year younger than I'd been when Zhao Jun killed me in my previous timeline. On the anniversary of my death from that other life, David found me sitting alone in our apartment, staring at nothing. What are you thinking about? He asked. About the fact that in another version of my life, I'd be dead by now, killed by the same man who's currently serving 8 years for stalking me in this timeline, mourned by a husband who finally believed me after it was too late. David sat beside me. But you're not dead. You're here, safe, loved, living the life you chose instead of the life that was chosen for you. Because I avoided one man at a library 5 years ago. Because you trusted yourself when everyone told you to give him a chance. Because you took threats seriously when others said you were overreacting. Because you demanded to be believed and protected yourself when that demand wasn't met. Do you think about it? The timeline where I married Li Wei? Where I died? I think about how close I came to never meeting you. How easily you could have made different choices. How grateful I am that you trusted your instincts. He pulled me close. That timeline doesn't exist. This one does. And in this one, you're alive in your mind, and that's what matters. 7 years after the library, I was 30 and pregnant with our first child. Zhao Jun was up for parole. Denied, much to my relief. Li Wei had gotten married to someone else. Someone who apparently didn't trigger his dismissive patterns the way I would have. I was at a prenatal appointment when I saw him in the hospital hallway. Not Zhao Jun, he was still safely in prison. Li Wei. His wife was obviously pregnant too, nearly the same stage I was. Our eyes met. He started to approach, then stopped himself. Remembered, probably the warning from police. The message to leave me alone. His wife noticed me, noticed his reaction, pulled him in the opposite direction with a look that suggested she knew exactly who I was and why her husband needed to stay away. That night, I looked up Li Wei's wife online. Her name was Zhang Lin. She was a doctor, confident and successful, with social media posts that suggested a very different dynamic than what I would have had with Li Wei. In one post she'd written, My husband is learning that when I say something concerns me, I mean it. Not always easy for him, but we're building trust and communication together. Growth is hard but necessary. So Li Wei was learning. With someone else. Someone who hadn't needed to die first to teach him the lesson. Good for them, David said when I showed him. Good for us, I corrected. Because I'm not the one teaching him. I'm not the practice relationship where he learns what not to do. I'm the one who got it right the first time. 10 years after the library, I was 33 with 2 children and a thriving career. Zhao Jun had died in prison. Natural causes, according to the report. Li Wei's marriage had ended in divorce. His wife had left him after repeated instances of him dismissing her concerns, according to the mutual friends who loved to gossip. Some patterns were harder to break than others. I ran into Li Mei again at a professional event. She hugged me like an old friend. You look happy, she said. I am. My brother asks about you sometimes. Wonders how your life turned out. He can keep wondering. He's still working on himself. Still in therapy. He finally understands that his tendency to dismiss people's concerns nearly costs someone their life. But it's slow progress. That's not my concern anymore. If it ever was. No, I know. I just wanted you to know that your refusal to engage with him was probably the wake-up call he needed. Not that it's your responsibility to provide wake-up calls, but it mattered. Tell him I hope he becomes the man he should have been from the beginning. But tell him to do it for himself and his future partners, not for me. I moved on a decade ago. 15 years after the library, I was 38 and both my children were in school. David and I were celebrating our 10th wedding anniversary, when he asked me something unexpected. Do you still think about the other timeline? The one where you married Li Wei? Less than I used to. Why? Because I want you to know that whatever happened there, whatever knowledge you brought back from that life, it gave us this one. And I'm grateful for it every single day. Even though it makes me sound crazy, you're not crazy. You're cautious for excellent reasons. You're protective of yourself because you learned the hard way what happens when you're not. That's not crazy. That's wisdom. I love you. I love you too. And I believe you. All of it. The stalker, the death, the rebirth, the knowledge. I believe you because you've never given me a reason not to. That was the difference between David and Li Wei. David believed me without needing proof. Li Wei would have demanded evidence and then dismissed it anyway. 20 years after the library, I was 43. My children were teenagers. My career was established. My marriage was strong. Zhao Jun had been dead for 13 years. Li Wei was on his 3rd serious relationship, apparently finally learning to listen to his partners. I heard through mutual connections that he'd become an advocate for believing victims, particularly victims of stalking and harassment. That his ex-wife's experience had fundamentally changed him. That he spoke at conferences about the importance of taking threats seriously even when they seem implausible. Good for him, I said when someone told me this. Growth is always possible. Don't you want to reach out? Tell him you appreciate that he changed. No. His growth isn't about me and I don't need to be part of his redemption story. He learned his lesson from his ex-wife. That's enough. But you could have been friends. I don't want to be friends with people I have to avoid everywhere. I don't want relationships that require constant vigilance. I spent enough of my previous life being hyper-aware of danger. In this life, I choose peace. 25 years after the library, I was 48. My children were in university. David and I were planning for retirement. Life was exactly what I'd built it to be, stable, secure, peaceful. I received a letter from Li Wei. Not a personal request to meet, just a letter forwarded through a mutual friend who'd asked permission first. Dear Chen Yao, it read. I know you've spent 25 years avoiding me, and I respect that boundary. I'm not writing to ask for anything or to explain myself. I'm writing because I want you to know that I finally understand why you avoided me from the very beginning. My ex-wife was stalked and I didn't believe her. She was hurt because of my dismissiveness. That pattern came from somewhere deep in my character, and you saw it before I did. You saved yourself from years of being dismissed and endangered. That took remarkable insight. I hope you've had a good life. I hope you've been safe and happy and surrounded by people who believe you. You deserved that. You always did. With respect and apology, Li Wei. I showed the letter to David. What do you think? I think he finally gets it. 25 years late, but he gets it. Should I respond? Do you want to? I thought about it. About the life I'd lived in my previous timeline, 3 years of terror, dismissal, death. About the life I'd built in this one. 25 years of being believed, supported, safe. No, I decided. He doesn't need my forgiveness or acknowledgement. He just needs to keep being better. And I need to keep living the life I chose. I never responded to the letter. But I kept it, a reminder of the path I'd chosen, and the one I'd refused to take. 30 years after the library, I was 53. David was planning my surprise birthday party. Our children were planning their own families. Life continued in its peaceful rhythm. Someone asked me at a party what the secret was to a happy marriage. Choose someone who believes you, I said simply. That's it. That's it. When you say you're scared, they don't dismiss it. When you say you're hurt, they don't minimize it. When you say you need something, they don't question whether you really do. They just believe you and act accordingly. That sounds like a low bar. You'd be surprised how many people can't clear it. Later, David found me alone on the balcony. Thinking about the road not taken? He asked. Thinking about how lucky I was to recognize it as a road not to take. How many women don't have that warning? How many women marry their Li Weiss and spend years being dismissed and endangered? You help them now. Through your advocacy work, through your story. I tell them what no one told me in my first life. Your instincts are valid. Your fear is real. You don't owe anyone the benefit of the doubt at the expense of your safety. And they listen? Some do. Some don't. Some marry their Li Weiss and learn the hard way. But the ones who listen, they're the ones who survive. 35 years after the library, I was 58. I'd retired from corporate work, but still did consulting. David and I were grandparents. Life had become the reward for decades of good choices. I was speaking at a women's safety conference when someone asked about my experience with stalking. I told them the full story, the stalker, the documentation, the trial, the conviction. But I left out one detail. The husband who hadn't believed me. That story belonged to someone else in this timeline. After the talk, a young woman approached me. Miss Chun, I'm being followed. I know I am. But my boyfriend says I'm being paranoid, that I'm creating problems, that I need to stop being so dramatic. What should I do? Document everything. Report it to police. Take security measures. And if your boyfriend continues to dismiss your concerns, leave him. But I love him. Love isn't enough if it doesn't come with belief and support. You can love someone who doesn't protect you, but that love will destroy you. That seems harsh. Would you rather be harsh and alive or understanding and dead? She stared at me, then slowly nodded. You're right. I know. Because I lived through it. And in another life I didn't survive. Don't be the version of me who didn't make it. 40 years after the library, I was 63. David and I were celebrating our 35th anniversary when he asked me a question he'd never asked before. If you could go back, knowing everything you know now, would you still avoid Li Wei in that library? Without hesitation. Even knowing he eventually changed? Even knowing he could have been different? He needed to change before deserving access to me. Not because of being rejected by me. I'm not a teaching tool for men who dismiss women. I'm a person who deserves to be believed from day one. Fair enough. Why do you ask? Because I've spent 35 years grateful that you avoided him. That you chose me. That you trusted yourself enough to walk away from someone everyone else thought was perfect. He wasn't perfect. He was dangerous in a subtle way. The kind of dangerous that doesn't leave bruises, but leaves you dead anyway. When I was 70 years old, Li Wei died. Heart attack, sudden, unexpected. I heard about it through mutual connections and felt nothing. No satisfaction that he'd died. No sadness that he was gone. Just an acknowledgement that a chapter I'd never participated in had finally closed. Are you going to the funeral? David asked. No. I'm not mourning someone I spent 47 years successfully avoiding. Fair. At my own 75th birthday party, surrounded by children, grandchildren, friends, colleagues, I thought about the two lives I'd lived. In one, I'd trusted the wrong person, married someone who didn't believe me, and died at 29. In this one, I'd trusted myself, avoided everywhere the man who would have killed me through negligence, and lived to 75 with decades of happiness behind me and hopefully more ahead. My granddaughter asked me that evening what the most important lesson I'd learned in life was. Trust yourself first, I said, before you trust anyone else. If something feels wrong, it probably is. If someone makes you uncomfortable, you don't owe them an explanation or a chance. You just owe yourself safety. Even if everyone else thinks you're being unreasonable? Especially then. Because everyone else isn't living in your body, feeling your fear, experiencing your reality. Only you know what you're feeling. And feelings are data. Important data. What if you're wrong? Then you're wrong and safe. Which is better than being right and dead. She thought about this. Is that what you did? Chose safety over what everyone else thought was reasonable. Yes. I avoided a man everyone thought was perfect for me. I took threats seriously that others dismissed as paranoia. I protected myself when others said I was overreacting. And I'm alive because of those choices. Do you regret being so cautious? Never. Not once. Not for a single moment. When I was 80 years old, David died peacefully in his sleep. We'd had 57 years together. Every one of them a gift I'd earned by trusting myself at 23. At his funeral, I spoke about what he'd meant to me. David was the man who believed me when I needed to be believed. Who never questioned my fear, my caution, my boundaries. Who understood that my safety was more important than his convenience. Who chose me first and kept choosing me every day after. That's not extraordinary love. That's what love should always be. But in a world where so many people are dismissed, minimized, and endangered by the people who claim to love them, it felt extraordinary. I'm grateful for every day I had with someone who understood that belief is the foundation of love. After the funeral, Li Wei's sister Li Mei approached me. She was elderly now too, moving slowly but with determined purpose. I wanted to tell you something, she said. Wei died thinking about you. Not romantically, he'd long since moved past that. But with profound respect. He told me once that you were the woman who saved his life by refusing to be in it. That your rejection forced him to face himself and change. He said you were the smartest person he'd ever met for seeing through him immediately. He should have been that person from the beginning. I know. But he wasn't. And you knew it before he did. She smiled sadly. I'm glad you lived the life you chose. The life you deserved. And I'm sorry my brother almost cost you that. He didn't almost cost me anything. Because I never gave him the chance. When I was 85 years old, my health began failing. I'd lived 56 years longer than I had in my previous timeline. 56 years of safety, love, respect, belief. 56 years I'd earned by avoiding one man in a library at 23. My children gathered around my hospital bed. The good kind of gathering, where everyone was saying goodbye to someone who'd lived fully rather than mourning someone who'd died too young. Mom, my eldest daughter said. Can I ask you something I've always wondered about? Of course. You always told us to trust our instincts, to walk away from people who made us uncomfortable, to prioritize safety over politeness. Where did that wisdom come from? It's not typical advice for your generation. I looked at my children, all of them alive because I'd survived. All of them safe because I'd learned what safety required. I learned it the hard way, I said. In ways I can't fully explain. But I learned that your instincts are your first line of defense. That discomfort is information. That walking away is often the bravest choice you can make. Did something happen to you? Something almost happened to me. But I listened to that voice that said danger, when everyone else said opportunity. And that voice saved my life. We're grateful you listened. Me too. That night, alone in my hospital room, I thought about Li Wei. About the man I'd avoided for 62 years. About the life I'd refused to live. I wondered if he'd ever truly understood why I'd run from him. If he'd ever grasped that it wasn't personal, or rather, it was deeply personal, but not about him specifically. It was about knowing that I deserved to be believed, and knowing he wouldn't believe me when it mattered most. In my previous life, he'd stood at my funeral saying, "I should have believed her." In this life, I'd made sure those words were never necessary. That was the shocking truth. I hadn't avoided Li Wei because he was evil or malicious or deliberately cruel. I'd avoided him because he was the kind of dangerous that looks like safety, the kind of harmful that everyone calls reasonable, the kind of man who would get me killed while insisting he was protecting me. And I'd seen it immediately. At 23. At a library table. In that first interaction. That recognition had saved my life. When I died at 87, peacefully, surrounded by family, my last thought was of gratitude. Gratitude for the second chance I'd somehow been given. Gratitude for the wisdom to use it well. Gratitude for every person who'd believed me when I said I felt unsafe. Gratitude for every boundary I'd set and maintained. Gratitude for choosing myself first. And somewhere, in whatever comes after, I hope the version of me who died at 29 was at peace. She'd suffered so I could learn. She'd died so I could live differently. Her death had bought my life. And I'd honored that sacrifice by living fully, safely, completely on my own terms. Li Wei had been shocked when I'd avoided him everywhere. Shocked that someone would choose safety over social expectation. Shocked that a woman would trust her instincts over his charm. That shock had saved us both. Me, because I'd never been his victim. Him, because he'd eventually learned from someone else's suffering what he should have known instinctively. We'd both lived better lives apart than we ever would have together. That was the gift of avoidance. That was the wisdom of walking away. That was the power of trusting yourself when everyone says you're wrong. And as I took my final breath, surrounded by the life I'd built through decades of good choices, I knew with absolute certainty. I'd made the right decision at that library table 64 years ago. And I'd make it again, in every timeline, in every universe, in every possible reality. Because some people are meant to be avoided. And some lives are only possible because you had the courage to run.